When the show stopped, everyone in the studio understood why they were crying. Simon Cowell had seen thousands of performances, heard every sob story, witnessed every dream and heartbreak on the America's Got Talent stage. But this night was different. This night, a man walked onto that stage carrying 30 years of guilt, and what happened next would change everyone who witnessed it. The elderly man stood center stage, his hands trembling as he adjusted the microphone. Behind him, the massive LED screen displayed his name, Robert Mitchell, 67, from Ohio. But the audience didn't know what Simon was about to hear. They didn't know that this quiet man in a simple dark suit was about to confess something that had haunted him for 3 decades. Simon leaned forward in his judge's chair, sensing something unusual in the air. The man's eyes weren't filled with the typical performer's excitement. Instead, there was something deeper, something broken that immediately caught Simon's attention. But what Robert was about to reveal would not only stop the show, it would stop time itself for everyone watching. If you want to see how one man's confession moved Simon Cowell to break every rule of the show, subscribe now because this story is just beginning. It started 3 hours earlier in the backstage area. Robert Mitchell had been sitting alone in the corner, clutching a worn photograph and a folded letter. Production assistants buzzed around him, but he seemed lost in his own world, preparing for what he knew would be the most important moment of his life. When asked about his talent, Robert had been vague. "I'm here to tell the truth," he had said softly. "Something I should have done 30 years ago." The producers assumed it would be another inspirational speech, another feel-good moment for television. They had no idea what was coming. Robert had driven 18 hours from his small town in Ohio, not to showcase a hidden talent or pursue fame, but to use the biggest stage in America for something far more important than entertainment. He was here to make amends for the biggest mistake of his life. 30 years earlier, Robert had been a truck driver. On a rainy night in 1993, rushing to make a delivery deadline, he had made a decision that would haunt him forever. A moment of impatience, a moment of selfishness that had devastating consequences. He had never been caught, never been prosecuted, but the guilt had been eating him alive ever since. As he waited backstage, Robert thought about the family he had destroyed with his actions, the life he had taken, and the decades of silence that followed. He had tried to find the victim's family countless times, but they had moved, disappeared into their grief. Until 3 months ago, when he finally tracked them down. The conversation that followed would drive him to this stage, to this moment, to this confession that would shock millions. Now, standing under the bright lights of the AGT stage, Robert took a deep breath and looked directly at Simon Cowell. "Mr. Cowell," he began, his voice shaking, "I'm not here to sing or dance. I'm here because 30 years ago, I killed someone, and I need to tell their family I'm sorry." The studio fell into complete silence. Simon's expression changed instantly from casual interest to intense focus. The other judges, Heidi, Howie, and Sophia, sat frozen in their chairs. In the audience, people stopped breathing. Robert continued, tears now streaming down his face. Her name was Sarah Chin. She was 23 years old, a nursing student. "I was driving my truck too fast in the rain, and I hit her car. I should have stopped. I should have called for help. But I was scared, and I drove away." Simon slowly stood up from his chair, something he had never done during a confession like this. The cameras captured every nuance of his reaction, the shock, the humanity, the recognition that this wasn't entertainment anymore. "I've spent 30 years living with what I did," Robert said, pulling out the photograph he had been holding. "This is Sarah. I carry her picture everywhere. Her family deserves to know what happened to her, and they deserve to know how sorry I am." But what happened next would prove that sometimes the most powerful moments on television aren't scripted. They're real. Simon walked around the judges' table and stepped onto the stage, breaking every protocol of the show. The audience watched in stunned silence as he approached Robert, who was now barely able to stand under the weight of his confession. "Robert," Simon said quietly, his voice barely picked up by the stage microphones, Tell me about Sarah's family. Have you spoken to them? Robert nodded, his whole body shaking. I found her parents 3 months ago. They're here tonight. In the audience. He pointed to the third row, where an elderly Asian couple sat holding hands, tears streaming down their faces. The cameras quickly found Sarah's parents, David and Linda Chin, now in their 70s. They had agreed to come, not for closure. Nothing could bring their daughter back. But because Robert had spent months proving to them that his remorse was genuine, that his guilt had transformed him into someone dedicated to making amends. Simon looked from Robert to the Chins, then back to Robert. In that moment, the seasoned judge who had built his career on tough critiques and sharp wit found himself in uncharted territory. This wasn't about talent or entertainment. This was about redemption, forgiveness, and the courage to face the consequences of one's actions. What do you want to happen here tonight, Robert? Simon asked, his voice gentle in a way the audience had rarely heard. I want to apologize publicly, Robert said. I want the world to know what I did, and I want Sarah's parents to know that not a day has gone by that I haven't thought about their daughter. I've started a scholarship in her name. I've dedicated my life to safe driving education. But most importantly, I want them to know that their daughter's life mattered, and her death changed me forever. The moment that followed would be remembered as the most powerful in AGT history. Simon turned toward the Chin family and gestured for them to come onto the stage. Security hesitated, unsure of the protocol, but Simon's authority was absolute. This isn't about the show anymore, he said firmly. This is about these people. As Sarah's parents slowly made their way to the stage, the entire studio held its breath. When they reached Robert, there was a moment of intense silence, 30 years of grief and guilt hanging in the air between them. Then, something extraordinary happened. Linda Chin, Sarah's mother, reached out and took Robert's hands. We forgave you months ago, she said softly. We've been waiting 30 years to tell you that. The impact was immediate and overwhelming. Robert collapsed into sobs, and David Chin, Sarah's father, put his arm around the man who had killed his daughter. The three of them stood together in an embrace that represented the kind of healing that transcends understanding. Simon watched from a few feet away, tears now visible on his own face. The judges, the audience, the crew, everyone was crying. This wasn't television anymore. This was life in its rawest, most honest form. After several minutes, Simon stepped forward and spoke to the audience, his voice thick with emotion. Ladies and gentlemen, what we've witnessed tonight goes beyond entertainment. This is about the power of truth, the possibility of forgiveness, and the courage it takes to face our worst mistakes. He turned to Robert and the Chin family. There will be no voting tonight. There will be no golden buzzer. What we've seen here is more valuable than any prize we could offer. But the most powerful moment was still to come. Simon pulled out his phone and made a call right there on stage. I'm calling the head of our charitable foundation, he explained to the audience. We're going to fund Sarah's scholarship permanently. We're going to turn Robert's remorse into something that honors her memory and saves other lives. The announcement sent ripples through the audience. But Simon wasn't finished. He looked directly into the main camera and spoke to the millions watching at home. If you've been carrying guilt about something you've done, if you've been running from the consequences of your actions, let Robert's courage inspire you. It's never too late to do the right thing. It's never too late to apologize. And sometimes, the people you've hurt are waiting to forgive you. The show ended there, with no other performances, no other acts. Just the image of three people who had found a way to transform tragedy into healing, guilt into purpose, and pain into hope. Subscribe and share this story if you believe in the power of redemption and the courage it takes to face our past. In the weeks that followed, Robert's appearance became the most watched AGT clip in history. But more importantly, it sparked a national conversation about forgiveness, accountability, and the healing that can come from facing our worst mistakes. Simon later said it was the most important moment he had ever witnessed on television. We often talk about talent and dreams, he reflected, But Robert showed us something more powerful: the talent for redemption and the dream of forgiveness. Sarah Chen's scholarship has now helped dozens of nursing students pursue their dreams. Robert Mitchell became a national advocate for safe driving, speaking at schools and conferences about the consequences of reckless decisions. And the Chen family found a peace they never thought possible. The show that was supposed to stop for 5 minutes to accommodate a confession ended up changing lives forever. Sometimes the most powerful performances aren't about entertaining an audience. They're about finding the courage to tell the truth. Share this video and subscribe if you believe that everyone deserves a chance at redemption, and that the courage to confess can transform not just our own lives, but the lives of everyone around us. Behind the scenes, the AGT production team was in complete chaos. No one knew how to handle what had just happened. The show's format, its rules, its very structure had been completely abandoned for something more important than entertainment. Producers were frantically calling network executives, trying to explain that they had just witnessed television history in the making. But Simon Cowell didn't care about the chaos he had caused. In the days following the show, he personally ensured that Robert's story would be told with the dignity it deserved. He worked with the network to create a special documentary about Robert's journey to redemption, following him as he spoke at driving safety seminars and met with other families affected by similar tragedies. The documentary revealed even more about Robert's transformation. After the accident 30 years ago, he had quit truck driving immediately and spent years in therapy, struggling with depression and PTSD. He had attempted suicide twice, stopped only by thoughts of Sarah Chen and the knowledge that ending his life would be the ultimate act of cowardice. Instead, he dedicated himself to living a life that would honor her memory. He became a volunteer firefighter, helping to save lives on the same highways where he had once taken one. He never married, never had children, channeling all his paternal instincts into mentoring young drivers and speaking to teenagers about the consequences of reckless behavior. The Chen family's journey to forgiveness hadn't been immediate either. When Robert first contacted them through a lawyer 3 months before the AGT appearance, they were angry and suspicious. Why was he coming forward now? What did he want from them? But as Robert proved his sincerity, showing them the scholarship he had started, the volunteer work he had done, the therapy records that documented his decades of genuine remorse, something shifted. David Chen, Sarah's father, later explained it to Simon in a private interview. "We realized that Robert had been serving a life sentence for 30 years, David said. He had been in his own prison, punishing himself in ways the legal system never could. Our daughter's death had destroyed one life and devastated another. Forgiveness wasn't about letting him off the hook, it was about freeing ourselves from the anger that was eating us alive." The ripple effects of that night continued for months. The AGT episode, when it aired, became the highest rated in the show's history. But more importantly, it inspired hundreds of people to come forward with their own buried guilt and hidden shame. Police departments across the country reported a surge in cold case confessions. People came forward to admit to hit-and-run accidents, thefts, and other crimes that had haunted them for years. Support groups formed for people dealing with long-term guilt. The phrase, Robert Courage, inspired by Robert Mitchell's example, became shorthand for the bravery required to face your worst mistakes. Simon Cowell himself was changed by the experience. Known for his sharp tongue and sometimes cruel critiques, he found himself approaching contestants with more empathy and understanding. He started a foundation called Second Chances that helped people turn their mistakes into opportunities for redemption. "Robert taught me that sometimes the most talented people are those who have learned from their failures," Simon said in an interview months later. "True talent isn't about perfect performance. It's about the courage to be vulnerable, to admit your mistakes, and to work every day to make amends." The scholarship fund that Simon established that night grew beyond anyone's expectations. Donations poured in from viewers around the world, inspired by the story of redemption and forgiveness they had witnessed. Within a year, the Sarah Chen Memorial Scholarship had provided full nursing school funding for 20 students, with preference given to those who had overcome significant personal challenges. One of the scholarship recipients wrote to Robert, "Your story taught me that our worst moments don't have to define us. They can redirect us toward our best selves." That letter, Robert said, was worth more than any applause he could have received on that stage. The Chin family became advocates for restorative justice, speaking at conferences and working with organizations that help both victims and perpetrators find healing. They established a foundation that facilitates conversations between people who have caused harm and those who have been harmed, always with the goal of mutual healing rather than punishment. As the first anniversary of the AGT appearance approached, Robert, the Chin family, and Simon Cowell reunited for a special segment on the show. This time, there were no tears of grief, only tears of joy as they celebrated how one moment of courage had created waves of positive change. Standing on that same stage where he had confessed his darkest secret, Robert looked different. The weight he had carried for 30 years was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose and peace. "This stage gave me back my life," he said simply. "Not because it made me famous, but because it gave me the courage to finally tell the truth." And in the audience, dozens of people sat who had been inspired by Robert's example to confront their own past mistakes, seek forgiveness, and dedicate themselves to making the world a little better than they found it.